Have you ever stopped to think that perhaps not all the people who are by our side, are they really what they seem? What if someone in your family didn't have a soul? That's the question that began to torment Mariana after noticing strange changes inside her own home. It all started subtly. Small gestures, cold looks, prolonged silences. Her brother Pedro had always been cheerful and full of life, but suddenly he started acting differently. His eyes were no longer transmitted warmth. It was as if they were empty. Mariana remembered him smiling infectiously as a child, but now the smile seemed forced, mechanical, almost like a mask. The nights began to feel strange. Mariana would wake with a heavy feeling in her chest as if she were being watched. Often when she opened her eyes, she would find Pedro standing in the hallway, motionless, just staring in the direction of her room without saying a word. When she questioned him the next day, he always said he didn't remember anything. But how could you not remember something so striking? The most disturbing thing was the look. Anyone who has ever encountered someone without a soul describes the same sensation. A profound emptiness, a gaze that pierces but conveys nothing. That's what Mariana felt. She looked at her brother and had the impression of being in front of a body that was present, but devoid of true life within. Was it just an illusion? Or was there something much darker going on? One night, during a family dinner, she noticed something even more disturbing. While everyone talked and laughed, Pedro remained silent, observing every movement, every word, as if he didn't belong there. When someone called his name, it took him seconds to react, as if he had to process the information. His fixed, distant gaze gave the impression that no one was there. Mariana began to wonder, was her brother still the same? Or had something taken his place? Things got worse when she found, on the table in his room, an old notebook with strange symbols drawn on it, pages filled with words that made no sense. Some sentences spoke of darkness, of the exchange of lives, of soulless bodies wandering among the living. As she leafed through them, Mariana felt a shiver so strong that she dropped the notebook to the floor. It was as if those words held weight, as if they carried an energy that shouldn't be there. And then the signs intensified. Animals in the house began to avoid Pedro. The dog, which had previously run happily to him, no rosnavalo, and hid under the table whenever he entered the room. The cat, in turn, would stare at him, its fur standing on end, as if it saw something humans couldn't. But the most terrifying moment happened one rainy dawn. Mariana woke suddenly, as if she'd heard someone calling her name. Opening her eyes, she saw the bedroom door ajar and a silhouette standing there. It was Pedro, but something was different. His face was pale, his eyes dark, sunken, and devoid of reflection. He simply stood there motionless, watching. Mariana, overcome with panic, tried to turn on the light, but the bulb burned out instantly. The room was filled with an almost suffocating darkness, and all that remained was that empty stare. She couldn't scream, couldn't move. It was as if she were paralyzed. After a few eternal seconds, Pedro simply turned his back and left, leaving behind the feeling that something inhuman had passed through. The next morning, when he asked what he was doing in his room, Pedro just smiled strangely and replied, "Are you sure it was me?" It was at that moment that Mariana realized she was no longer dealing with just behavioral changes. What inhabited her brother's body was no longer just him. Something had taken its place, and perhaps, just perhaps, Pedro no longer had a soul. After that night, Mariana began to observe every detail, every gesture. Every word from Pedro seemed charged with something strange, as if it came not from within him, but from some dark place. His presence in the house was no longer comfortable. It was suffocating. The atmosphere grew heavy when he entered a room, as if the light itself had gone out. She began to notice that the mirrors reacted differently when Pedro approached. As he passed in front of them, his reflections seemed delayed, as if it took a second longer to catch up. Other times, Mariana swore she saw his reflection smile, even when his face remained serious. These details terrified her. But when she told her, "Mother," her response was always the same: "You're imagining things." But she knew it wasn't her imagination. The worst part was finding his room with the curtains drawn, a strong, musty smell, and burnt candles scattered across the floor, forming symbols she'd never seen before. In the center, a bowl of dark water and pieces of paper with torn names. When Mariana tried to ask about them, Pedro simply said, "They're my things. Don't pry." His tone was cold, distant, as if he were a complete stranger. Nights became torment. Pedro paced the house in the early hours of the morning, dragging his feet down the hallway. Mariana hid under the covers, but she always heard her bedroom doorknob turn slowly, as if someone was testing if it was locked. One night he forgot to lock it. She woke to find him standing beside the bed, motionless, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't move. The fear was so great that she simply closed her eyes and prayed silently, asking for it to end soon. When she opened it again, he was gone. But the signs began to become unbearable. The neighbor's puppy, which had previously avoided Pedro, now refused to enter the family's yard. It kept barking outside, as if spotting something hidden inside. Neighbors began to comment that they saw Pedro walking alone down the street in the early hours of the morning, staring at houses, standing in front of windows, as if observing who slept inside. Mariana, desperate, decided to seek spiritual help. She spoke with an acquaintance who had been studying spirituality for years. He listened attentively and said something that made her freeze. "Not every body holds a soul. Some become mere shells, occupied by something that does not belong to the light." Those words echoed in her mind like a warning. Was her brother no longer the same? Had his soul been taken over by something that now used his body as its home? That night, when Mariana returned home, she found Pedro sitting in the dark living room, staring at the bare wall. Unaware she was there, he murmured disjointed sentences, words in a language she didn't understand. His voice wasn't exactly his, it was deeper, drawn out, as if it were an echo from another dimension. When Mariana turned on the light, he immediately fell silent, turned his head slowly, and with a cold smile said, "You shouldn't be seeing this." And in that moment, she was sure. Pedro was no longer just her brother. After that night in the living room, Mariana had no doubts. The being inhabiting Pedro's body was no longer the brother she knew. With each passing day, his presence grew heavier, as if an invisible shadow followed him through every room. Even the house itself seemed to change. The walls creaked, the lamps flickered, and a constant chill filled the hallways, even on the hottest days. What frightened her most was his gaze. Pedro's eyes grew darker and darker, sunken and without reflection, like bottomless wells. Whenever he met her gaze, Mariana felt as if something were trying to penetrate her mind, invading her most intimate thoughts. One morning, he woke up with voices whispering around her bed. They weren't clear, but they seemed like several, repeating phrases in chorus in a language she didn't understand. When she opened her eyes, she saw Pedro standing in the doorway, his head slightly tilted, and a vacant, disturbing smile. Beside him, a larger shadow projected itself against the wall, much taller than her body could manage. Frightened, Mariana ran to her mother's room, but found the door locked. She knocked desperate, but no one answered. When she looked back into the hallway, Pedro was no longer there. Only the shadow remained, motionless, as if watching. The next day, when she tried to confront him, she heard something from him that made her shudder. "The Pedro you knew is gone. He let me in, and now I'll never leave." These words wouldn't leave her mind. She decided to seek out the spiritual acquaintance who had warned her about soulless bodies again. He listened to her in silence and finally said, "When someone's soul is lost, and the body can be inhabited by forces seeking to feed on the family's energy, they suck the life out of those around them. And if you stay in this house, you could be next." Desperation gripped Mariana. She returned home, determined to uncover the truth. She waited until dawn and snuck into her brother's room. What she found shocked her. On the floor, a circle drawn in charcoal. Strange. Symbols scattered throughout, and in the center, the same notebook she had seen before, now open to a page that read in blurred letters, "Empty bodies, trapped souls, eternal bonds." Suddenly, Pedro appeared behind her, but he wasn't her brother anymore. His smile was too wide, almost inhuman, and his voice echoed like two voices at once as he said, "Now you know, and you can't escape it anymore." The windows closed by themselves, the wind blew coldly, and all the lights went out. The clock in the house read exactly 3:07. Mariana panicked, realized she was no longer facing a brother, but something much darker, something that used his face only as a mask. And it was at that moment that the shadow moved, advancing toward her, while the voice repeated over and over, "A body, a house, a family, they can all be mine."